Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and it is good to be with all of you. I'll apologize in advance. Um, I'm fine, and I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. So I think that's true for lots of us these days. So Jenny mentioned earlier that I am the lead minister of First Unitarian, and I want to be specific, but I will be not comprehensive, certainly, in talking about the community that I lead and the communities that I represent. So I'm here in part because I am a religious leader, and I'm here in part because I am of Asian descent. And I lead a primarily white, not exclusively white, but primarily white congregation. And I know that's true for some of the other people in the room also. Our topic of healing hate is an important one, and again, not for all of the communities that are represented by leaders in this room, but many of them. I am not certain that all of our congregations, our communities, and certainly not mine, already understand our problem statement to be that hatred needs healing, right? That the ways hatred and the ways that bias and prejudice are manifested in our own communities and in our broader community is not something that everyone has a clear sense or perspective of. I would imagine from headlines that most of the people in this room have a sense of violence and threats against Asian Americans and people of Asian descent escalating rather significantly in the last couple of years. And it is different, and this is true certainly in lots of other ways societal violence plays out, but it is different, of course, when it's a headline than when it's your family. So, we heard 2 years ago after George Floyd's killing that Rochester doesn't have a problem with excessive police violence. Turns out that's not true, and lots of us already knew that. That is also true with violence, whether that's structural or, in fact, physical, against people of Asian descent. That threats, comments, micro and just regular old aggression towards people of Asian descent has escalated in the Rochester area. And I want to name that really clearly in case that is news to anyone here in this room. It is not a competition, right? Attention to anti-Asian violence and anti-Asian hatred does not take away from the attention that's needed in healing and restoration and renewal of systems that repress and cause violence or bring out hatred towards Black people or Indigenous people or other groups. So I want to be very clear. It is worth naming, and this is true for lots of our communities, but it is worth naming that the community that I lead, Unitarian Universalists in Rochester, are an overwhelmingly politically progressive group of people, right? Now that has a spectrum, and I don't mean to suggest that everyone is politically liberal in my congregation, but overwhelmingly you will hear a political and social ideology that is left-leaning. And there is a fidelity to a piece that suits many, but not all, that has held us back, held us in fear, prevents us from being as radically and courageously loving as we could possibly be. So the anti-racism and racial identity work that leads people in my community and congregation to better combat or heal anti-Asian hatred is in lots of ways the same work that has opened us up to other kinds of racial justice work. We talk a lot about paradox in our community. I don't think I'm alone in that. There is this is not a universal claim, and I don't mean to speak on behalf of your community by any means, but the ability to hold two truths at the same time is a hallmark of spiritual maturity in my tradition. And so one of the things that is clear and that we hold front and center is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So every person, no matter how bigoted, is worthy of respect, of human goodness. There's nothing they can do to change it. There's nothing I can do to change it. And not all behavior is acceptable. And we talk a lot about the paradox of intolerance. This is a social concept, but it's certainly, we believe that we need to exercise spiritual practices in order to be able to hold this truth. So for those who don't know, the paradox of intolerance suggests that, or not suggests, states that there is this difficult thing when it comes to a diversity of ideas in which the largest and most expansive diversity can only be maintained by not tolerating that which aims to repress or reduce diversity. So tolerance, and tolerance is a low bar, let's be very clear about that, but that tolerance is best served by being intolerant of intolerance. So Tabassum mentioned this earlier, but that taking others out to coffee is a major part of our practice. It's not as often going out to coffee in COVID times, but instead a phone call, but a proactive approach to accompanying people through dismantling their own internal biases is a major understanding of how we lead in our community. But what we've discovered in the last few years, and I'm the first senior minister of color in my congregation, the first minister of color who has lasted more than a year in my congregation, the only minister of color who's lasted more than a year in my congregation. So part of the way that I continue to lead is that this is not work that I do alone. And in our community, we're not interested in replicating forces of state repression. We're not trying to police people's behavior. We are trying to spiritually companion people, and we actively prioritize the well-being and inclusion of historically underrepresented populations in our community, right? So it actually does matter a lot to us if someone is reporting that they are feeling not included, and we look around the room and this is someone whose demographics, quite frankly, are underrepresented based on the rest of Rochester, right? So Rochester is a minority white community. And people will say, okay, but your church, you draw from eastern suburbs as well. And I look at, cities like Pittsford and Victor, which are the whitest school districts in the Rochester metro area. And they are proportionally more racially diverse than my congregation is. So there's a clear and hard truth that needs to be named there. And we talk a lot about priorities. And even when we think we're treating everyone equally, that isn't the case, right? Because clearly there is something that we are seeing in who feels comfortable in our church, who feels like this is a spiritual home for them. We hear a lot about how we have a theology that is interesting and worthwhile and meaningful for a broader swath of people, but the culture and historical conditions of our church do not allow for those people to make their spiritual home here. So I'll return to what does it mean for the senior minister to see the spiritual accompaniment of dismantling racial bias as a major part of my leadership. It's not work that I can do alone. There are just too many people, and all of us are on this journey in some fashion, right? And it requires active circles of accountability. This isn't a one and done thing. Perhaps Tabassum has much more impactful coffees than I do. I find that this is a conversation I have been having for decades in my own life. And that's true for most of the people I encounter. And so we actively encourage people to form circles of accountability, and we actively equip lay leaders, other people in the congregation to have difficult conversations. We talk a lot about having hard conversations as a core spiritual practice of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. And we give people communication skills. It feels, and this could be a completely fair accusation that you can place on my spiritual community. I will take no offense. But we dabble fiercely, more than dabble. We locate ourselves fiercely in practical skills because we believe that what you do repeatedly and how you are in relationships with people is a more important testimony to faith than a proclamation of belief. And that for us is a theological claim. It's not, I think, something that's universally held in this room, but I'll say that from our orientation, that matters a lot. So it is not enough to say that you love, but what matters is that you're practicing having hard conversations, and that we lean into mistakes. We lean into risk-taking. We lean into not knowing how to do the thing, not needing to be an expert before you have done the thing. So I don't think our strategies are magical, and that is a major part of the learning. If I can offer one thing, it is the thing that we repeat again and again, is often we arrive in conversations like this wanting this perfect technique that will help us become a more loving community, right? That if only we knew how to do this thing, we could become the beloved community. And as I look around in this room, if we all haven't figured it out, there are a lot of smart people here. It's not one magic thing. We all know that. It's just doing the thing again and again that we don't know how to do that well yet. So that's me.
Cannot thank you enough. You have gotten us off to a wonderful start. And we'll hear more from Shari after we have heard from William and from Tabassum. William, would you share your perspectives on healing hatred? Welcome, Martha. William.
Well, this morning.
Yeah. You're on, William.
I guess I should, yep, I was going to say this morning, but now we're in the afternoon. I want to share some thoughts from my social location, and from where I'm at today when it comes to this word hate. For me, this conversation is about, getting towards the transforming of a culture of hate in the United States of America. And I guess for me, I think of Odysseus on the sands of Troy after the Greeks have overturned Troy and Troy is burning, and Odysseus, thinking that the battle is done, looks at the ocean and presciently says, "Forsan edhaik olim meminissa yuavit." Perhaps at some future time it will help to remember these things. He doesn't know, but he has a fear. It's going to take him a long time to get home. 20 years it took him. And even then he had to fight. For me, approaching hatred means, first of all, I have to get beyond what my culture is telling me. That is to say that everything is about the individual versus the society. And remember that hatred was not invented by individuals, that hatred is a social phenomenon. And so hatred can never be looked at, I believe, by itself. Some people define hatred as a negation of intimacy, an infusion of fear or anger with passion, a decision to devalue the previously valued person or object of this emotion. And psychologically, some people think that hatred has to do with an ego state of wishing to destroy the source of the unhappiness that is linked to the question of self-preservation. Now, seeing all that, it really helps me to then put hatred in a couple of contexts. The first one is in the context of prejudice. Gordon Allport in the 1950s talked about a scale of prejudice, talked about anti-locution, saying negative words about a group as the beginning, and then avoidance, active avoidance, like separation, segregation, being at a distance, even unintentionally causing harm, but causing harm because of that. And then discrimination is a deeper form, because discrimination is on purpose. It is intentional. And this is the denial of access to basically life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in our American terms to the other. On the same continuum of prejudice is physical attack. George Floyd, Indian massacres, Native American massacres, enslavement, lynching, and then finally extermination. That all of these parts, and hatred is a part of this whole spectrum of ultimately getting rid of the other. Now, of course, in the United States, my background coming from Nigeria and Virginia, the Powhatan Federation of Peoples, and Ireland, my whole makeup has been subject to the them and us mentality, of which hate is a tool. And so as you look at this, we really have to understand that when we talk about hatred, if you want to start to oppose hatred, dismantle hatred, change hatred, you're really asking to look at the society of which hatred is a tool, is a part. And that's where it helps me to think about Stanton's 10 stages of genocide. Because for me, hatred is a part of what leads to genocide. Think of the history of African Americans coming to this country unwillingly and the role that genocide played in that. Think of the acquisition of native lands and the role that genocide played in that. But when we think about genocide, don't just think of someone gets killed and their bodies get thrown in a ditch. Think of the selective destruction of a people by taking their intellectual class and killing them, or removing them, or taking the children of that class and removing them. Think about enslaving peoples from different tribes, bringing them to the West Indies to break them, and then bringing them to the United States, the triangular trade, because it wasn't just a matter of taking people from Africa right to the United States. It takes a lot to destroy the spirit of a people, or to try to destroy that. If I then think about the culture of hate, I really automatically have to look at how does our social life today reflect a social attitude of hatred. An example, of course, in the Rochester area is, how did our communities come to be so segregated? And how have we come to allow them to remain segregated? That is to say, how do we look beyond our personal feelings and ask ourselves, are we living hate? Are we living, for instance, the labeling that's involved in hatred? Are we living the separation and segregation that is stated in hatred? Are we living the genocide of the mind of our folks, who are the them when we may be the us? And so hatred to me calls us to look at our social institutions and how the processes of which hatred is a part, basically genocide of the other, how does that play out? And as we then do social programs to so-called fight hatred, are we willing to ask the deepest questions? And when we get an answer that says go deeper and go wider, go underneath and maybe over, that is the challenge of dealing with hatred. And like my sister said, all of this you got to do in love. Because if you don't do it in love, then you, like Martin Luther King says, we will die. Either we'll do this together, or we'll die together as fools. And of course, he said also, love can take out hatred. Hatred won't take out itself. So I think the questions and answers that we're about to have will really be illuminating for me. And I hope that this little bit that I've shared, this perspective on hatred, can be helpful to our conversation.
I know that it will be helpful, William. It's something that we have to live into, as you say. And our final panelist for today is Dr. Tabassum Javed, president of the Islamic Center of Rochester. Tabassum, how are you healing hate? And how is your community healing hate?
You're on mute. Okay, I'm back. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
All right. So I approached the Imam, a couple of months ago to incorporate these messages that William so eloquently stated. The root causes, how to reach, how to, be able to overcome many of these barriers and go to the other side in a positive way. And this is a struggle, as he mentioned, it is. So I told the Imam to, look up all the verses in the Quran, which there are many, in which there's equity for the other person. That's why the term brother and sister was used by Prophet Muhammad for all the people who were the followers of Islam, and which really essentially is saying that we are brothers and sisters in the real sense, in spirit, as well as in terms of our soulmates being, together in every way. And so I requested that because I felt that even with the COVID, our congregations, about 230 on the first Friday, and about another 230 on the second one. So like close to 500 people would hear the message. And he has been incorporating that, and I'm hoping that that message will go deeper with the congregation and they will make a difference in whatever way they interact with other people. As I said earlier, I see this, even though William had mentioned that there is definitely an institutional component to it. I fully agree with that. There's we could even go to the banks loaning, money to certain businesses in certain areas so they can foster, growth, and holding it back from another community so they don't come there, So, sure, that all exists. But I was saying that from a congregation point of view, on the Friday prayer, if 500 people get a message like that, and they interact in their own little worlds and take this message with them, and they will have a certain impact in which we will change people's thinking. Because Muslims have been a target, just like Shari was saying that, Asian Americans were. Muslims were, a target, of hate. I mean, this is 200 billion people out there. And how many hijackers were the one who went on 9/11? 15 people out of 200 billion people. And yet the Pew Research, in 2020 indicated that only 7% of Americans have a favorable view of Islam. So we have been on the other side of this. And yet at the same time, somebody at the Islamic Center, who will raise this question with me and you say, what can you do in terms of changing the view of other people? And I said, well, we just do it one at a time, just the way we do everything else. And then I also tell them, which gives them hope. And that is, I say, well, let me tell you that the interfaith group, I meet and hang out with once in a while, I said, I see nothing but abundance, overflow of love. And so that neutralizes what they may have in terms of presupposing that just because you're a Muslim, instantly somebody is not going to like you, So obviously, I mean, they see the data too. I was told that by the ICNA, the Islamic Association National, that 7% number has moved now to 21%, and that is just because, you look at Jacksonville, I just visited that, Florida, Orlando, Muslims are running the Mecca clinics. Muslim physicians are in abundance. 10% of all the physicians in America come from the Muslim faith. And that's a very big number. So they are opening up these free clinics. If you don't have insurance, they'll go to the neighborhood where people are uninsured, where people do not get the services. And all of a sudden, the Mecca clinics, for example, they will not ask any question. They'll give the treatment. They do take care of the person, the patient. And then the patient will come to the realization, my God, who are these folks, by the way? Who are these guys with a, thick accent? Who are these guys, who are wearing a little cap on their head and maybe, just about to say their prayer for the afternoon? I mean, who are these people? And so one by one, that kind of bias and barriers, they fall. But I can tell you that when I go to the crowd at the Islamic Center and tell them, the loving people that are today even, present on this forum, including Denny and everybody else, I just tell them that because these kind of things coming from me, takes care of their presuppositions that the Christians out there, the Jews out there, the Orthodox, the Unitarians, the Catholics, the Baha'is, the American Indians. I mean, all of these people may have, a view of us which is not favorable. So what helps is for you to be able to say that, my God, do I really see these loving people who I interact with? And every time I do that, I pass this message on so they know that the love I receive is genuine, and it is something that is going to be infectious in terms of getting to other people who will then change their views about it. So my view remains the same, and that is that in spite of the fact we have inequities, we have racial inequalities, we have bias, and we have these cocoons, when William was mentioning that how this hate flourishes, I always think about, the white supremacy movement. They go on the internet, they are in this cocoon, they find like-minded people who can spew hate, and then they find another 100 people who can give thumbs up to the hate message they gave. And before you know, this is a community that has learned how to hate, and that happens to be in which they have become proficient, But on the other hand, our struggle will remain, and that is that we try to negate the effects of that. Obviously, we cannot find, institutional solutions amongst us, but we can certainly find community solutions. And community solutions will eventually lead to institutional solutions that will correct the wrongs that our society has endured. And that is pretty much my thought. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you, Tabassum, and thank you, Shari, and thank you, William. What you have shared is a great blessing to each of us. Tabassum, I'm recalling when Fazan Islam's daughter gathered 400 people at the Islamic Center
Right,
in a program called From Strangers to Neighbors.
right.
She presented 5 or 6 Muslim people from 5 or 6 different nations, telling their story extremely briefly. But they did point out why they left their homeland, what they have found here. And it was very moving. They then pantomimed a scene of strangers. They all wore a sign that said stranger. And they pantomimed walking along, and one of them was obviously very pregnant, and she went into strong labor. And of course, all of these strangers turned their sign around and they became neighbors and helped this woman give birth.
Right.
And then we all went and had the best food in the history of the world. You know,
Yes.
wonderful, wonderful food. And this was created by, how old is her name Simha?
You know, her name was, I'm trying to, are you, because there were 2 ladies who did that. You know, one.
But it was
one
the child. It was the child who did it.
Okay,
She
that's I'm trying to think.
Farzana Islam's
Sinha
daughter.
Farzana Islam.
That's her daughter, though.
Yeah, you know, but the
Simha, I think, is her name. And
Yeah.
she was, I think, 16 at the time. And
Yeah,
she was a classmate of one of my many grandchildren at Brighton. And it was just a phenomenal success that a kid could put on such a wonderful success. Another quick story I want to share is when the Tree of Life synagogue
Right.
was attacked, the Muslim community turned out in great support of the families. I believe they may have paid all of their funeral expenses.
They
Some
did.
really marvelous outpouring of love.
They did.
And the Rochester community showed up at Temple Brith Kodesh in strong support.
Absolutely.
And that little girl, that teenager from the Muslim community, was one of the many speakers at Temple Brith Kodesh that day.
Yes.
Just a great sign of healing hate. There are many such. Another that I want to say is that the Jewish community had a program that I think was called Why Hate? And it was held at the Lyric Theater about 3 years ago. And it featured a white anarchist, a self-proclaimed white anarchist, and a Sufi Muslim. And these 2 men, self-proclaimed white anarchist and Sufi Muslim, are on a speaking tour. The Sufi Muslim is helping the white anarchist come to grips with the conversion process that he knows he needs. And here's a fast run on his own story. His father was an alcoholic who was brutal, and he had target practice in his basement in the middle of the night. That was a regular practice. His mother was one of those women that kept the house nicely in a nice middle-class neighborhood, fed the children very nice dinners every evening, and maintained an appearance of respectability, etc. And this little boy chose to imitate his father, made a distinct decision on his way to kindergarten. I am gonna be the tough guy. And he remained that way until he was in his mid or late 20s. Every single day he caused trouble that he himself describes. He was a head of a team of white anarchists. Among them was a hard rock metal band. And one of those people shot and killed this Sufi Muslim's father in a mosque. The Sufi Muslim found out who was the leader of these people, one of whom killed his father, chose to make a phone call to him and ask him to meet with him because he wanted to ask why. Interestingly, the self-proclaimed white anarchist had just given birth to his firstborn child. And in holding this baby daughter, he realized he did not want her to have to live in such a world as he was creating. He did not know what to do or how to do it, but one thing he did do was accept the phone call invitation from the Sufi Muslim. And they met in a Thai restaurant. The Sufi Muslim was wearing a white patch on his eye. And the white anarchist said for the first time in his life, "What's the matter with your eye?" So from holding his daughter and realizing this is not the world I want her to grow up into that I've been creating, and his first example in something like 27 years of showing any amount of care for another human being
Right.
was his asking, "What's the matter with your eye?" He realized when he was asking, whoa, this is the first time I ever asked anybody anything like that. And the Sufi Muslim is one of the most eloquent teachers I have ever heard. And he has partnered with this man. They meet regularly, they work together. The white anarchist says he has a long way to go and he's willing to do the work. And I invite you all to pray for him.
Absolutely.
Pray for the Sufi Muslim too, that he continues to have the courage, the tenacity, the perseverance to carry out such a ministry. But what a ministry.
It's
So,
amazing. Amazing.
yeah, and we can tell stories like that of all of our communities and their opposite. I held Muslim Christian dialogues at Church of the Assumption for 30 weeks. And the first time we gathered, it's a Catholic facility, so there were 21 Catholics and 5 Muslims. And the first time we met, we had a lovely sharing. We had prayer, interfaith prayer, wholesome, very wholesome. Introduced ourselves to one another, and I don't remember what provocative questions we shared on, but we shared. And before the 2.5-hour session was over, one of the Muslim women said, "Next week when we meet, I want you to come to my house. I would like to serve you lunch," because we were meeting at this incredible time
Right.
during the lunchtime. And we accepted her invitation happily, hungrily. And there we were eating again the world's most wonderful food. And boom, at 12 o'clock, our Muslim hosts were on the floor in worship.
Yeah.
And oh, we learned a thing or two right there. On another day when we met, a Bosnian American said, "A Croatian Catholic killed my unarmed civilian father." And all of us felt so blessed that she would have the stamina to come into our house of worship and meet with us.
That was.
Well, everybody, what are your questions and observations for Reverend Shari Halliday Kwan, for Reverend Dr. William Wilkinson, and Dr. Tabassum Javed?
Denny, I sent you a message indicating that I have to give someone a ride to a medical appointment.
You're certainly doing God's will there. Thank
Yeah,
you.
this is again a community service,
Yes.
but I want to be the first one to answer if there's any question before I depart. And I'm in wonderful company here, as I said before, and it is my ultimate pleasure and honor to really share all these thoughts.
Marilyn has a question.
I'd just like to say this. I appreciate all the panel. It was rich, it was good. Solutions, antidotes. But my thing is, okay, we can't cook a fish, fry it, fillet it, saute it, stew it until we get it out of the water. And last year I was faced with the position of being hated right in my face. And the only thing I knew to do was pray. And it was during the Daniel Crude when we had a meeting at the church on Clarissa Street. So I'm thankful of the antidote, but in the climate that we're dealing in today, we got to get these. What do you do when you're confronted with that hate, that all they're doing is breathing hate, and won't let you talk, won't let you say anything? And I appreciate this conversation, but there's more to it than what we're talking to today, because sometimes hate will look you in the face and you won't have time to think of one of these antidotes or do. Love should always be a part of us. That love was a part of me that day, but fear also gripped me standing at that podium. Fear gripped me. And the only thing I could do at that moment was say, let's pray. And thanks be to God that knows our hearts and knows our minds in the climate that we're in today. He came to my rescue. He came to our rescue. And when I opened up my eyes, those over 200 haters that day were walking out of that parking lot. So, I appreciate everything, but until we can get the fish out the water, we can't do anything, because it's going to do what it want to do in the water. And that's where the organizers come in. What do we do to go out there to bring them in? Or what do we do as when they're hating like that? You can't get a message through, especially when it's 200 strong hating and trying to get their message across. So that's my comment. That's my question. And that's my experience that I've dealt with hate, especially last summer.
I have a question. Is it Dr. Shafi? I'm driving, but you mentioned something about segregation and praying about it, and how do we allow segregation to actually exist within our own communities? An example, you mentioned Pittsford and Penfield. These are segregated communities, no matter how you look at it. I have been to football games where everyone in the team, 99.9% of the team youth, are white. It might be a couple of Latinos and a couple of Black kids in there, but it's rare. So I'm wondering, how do we allow that to happen within our own communities? And we're talking about love and unity, and how can the churches start addressing that issue that isn't right in front of us? It's there. That's my question.
I can only attest to that, because I live in Victor, and my 3 boys who played varsity football and didn't get prejudicial, probably, slogans heard at them, was maybe because they were very popular 3 varsity players in football, but they were the only 3 non-white kids. This is about 20 years ago. And out of 1,100 kids at that time, they were the only 3 Muslim kids. So this was a multi-layered thing. Now, to answer Carlos's other question, the bottom line becomes it's like, you've heard of redlining. For example, if the average home in Pittsford starts at $500,000 or 450,000, and so does the neighborhood in Victor, it's like all of a sudden there is going to be a group of people who are just not going to make the cut just because of their socioeconomic status. And that is where I mentioned the institutional part, how that needs to be cured. We were talking mainly about how our interpersonal hate, people, like group hate, thoughts about hate, thoughts about putting down people who don't look like you, or don't act like you, or don't talk like you, or have an accent, or have a skin color that is, different than the majority of the people. That is the area where I was commenting on. Institutionally, I already gave you the answer. And if a district or an area has been redlined, and only those people who are very affluent are going to be able to afford the taxes for that area, automatically that is going to become a discriminatory place, because you have already weeded out the ones who some people wanted to weed out. So that's the answer to that, Carlos.
So if it's all right, I'd like to say something to Reverend Marilyn. I'm really sorry that you had such a horrific experience, and I would imagine that it took a long time to recover from that if you have. I'm sorry that is the world that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to go a little bit further with this question, and that is, after I retired, I spent a lot of time going to the Penfield Town Board meetings and trying to look at housing. And what's considered affordable housing is so far out of range for many of the people who live in the city of Rochester,
Yes.
that even affordable housing doesn't get them into the suburbs. And even if it does get them into the suburbs, we don't have a transportation structure that allows people who don't have cars to get to jobs. So, there are ways you could integrate communities if you truly made the housing affordable. Like $1,800 a month is considered affordable. I don't think so. Not for the people that I'm seeing in my clinic. They can never make it. So that just leads me to one other question, and that is, how much effort in a congregation or a community do you expend on structural efforts to make structural change versus the amount of time and effort that you expend in doing what Reverend Kwan was talking about, which I think makes life worth living for the people who engage, but doesn't change life for the people who need advocacy.
Yes, let me tell you that we had the Brighton town supervisor come to the Islamic Center, and I raised that question. So that was the institutional component of what I said earlier. And that is that, listen, Bill, it's very important that there are some people who want to come and live in Brighton who may not be able to afford, the average rent over there, just the way you mentioned. For somebody, 1,800 may be average, but for the other person, 800 may be the average. And they are so far off from that target. So that is the other area where we can do, is that our town supervisors, our congressional delegations, our mayoral people, is where we bring that up and have the resources diverted. Because there is tax money. It's a matter of what the priority is going to be and how that diversion can take place, because the push that comes from us, So that is one solution towards it. Denny, I hate to depart at this time. Forgive me for that. And if there's any pending questions, I would want to answer it at another time. And for Carlos, he thought that I was Dr. Shafiq. I'm Tabassum Javed, and that's fine. Shafiq is a brother as well. He may not be here today. Take care. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your kind words. Thank you for all your thoughts. And thank you for all your actions that you are planning to have to make a little bit of difference, one person at a time.
Thank you.
Assalamu
Tamasan.
alaikum.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Tamasan just referred to, and so did Carlos, referred to Dr. Muhammad Shafiq. He has a pacemaker put in, and he's still recovering.
Yes.
Otherwise, he would be with us. He's very much a part of this group. Who
So
has another comment or yes, William?
There's a reason why it's important that people have raised both the institutional and the individual piece. And I believe is that They have to go together. One of the problems of we who try to advocate, one of the problems we fall into is mistaking the issue on which we're working as if it were the whole pie and not a piece of the pie. Now, I offered a couple of frameworks, the work of Gordon Allport on prejudice, and the work of Stanton on genocide. There's also a woman named Barbara Harmf, Harff, who talks about the risks of genocide. That is to say, how do societies look at themselves to see what are the risks of genocide? And I want to offer to you that we are very similar to 1930s Germany. We think we're free, but there are leaders and parts of our society that are dividing us. So a divided society, one of the biggest things that happens with genocide, hate speech that is allowed. That is to say, the bar is set so high for hate speech to be considered hate speech that a lot of hate speech is allowed. And so in the United States, I believe that we need to have a framework in which we're looking. And I think that framework is authoritarianism. And I think we need to see racism, the taking of lands from Native Americans and immigration as indicators of where we need to go. That is to say, if there is a mentality of genocide in a culture, they will try to take land from original peoples or resist giving it back, because there are lots of original peoples that are asking for their land back. They will resist reparations for slavery as if something is being taken from them, which is blaming the victim. And they will villainize immigration suddenly, now that they're here, because this is the them and us mentality that sits just behind what goes for legalism. In the history of hatred, it has always been the attempt of those who hate for power reasons to legalize what they do. The doctrine of discovery was a legalization of the Christian church to kill people, take their land, and do all the other stuff. The laws in the 1930s against Jews was an attempt to legalize the them and us. And so all these legal struggles that we're seeing, like the voting rights, all of that stuff is a part of genocide. So you don't just think of genocide as killing people. Think of genocide as taking away people's life chances because they are who they are. The real challenge, I believe, is that those of us who have been truly privileged by these dynamics are going to be called to life-changing living. It's not going to be good enough to do something individually and feel good. Nero played the fiddle by Rome Byrne. You know that expression. We're called to be connected to all the communities that are being marginalized. I mean, have relationships there. Begin to see from their point of view the issue, not from my either guilt-based or do-gooder mentality, but what is the mentality of those who are hard-pressed, and to stand with them. Marilyn Cunningham when she spoke at the U of R a few years ago, said, you got to stand up and be present. By doing that, you put yourself at risk, but you build that relationship with the people who will be those numbers, so that Marilyn won't be in front of a crowd that's angry, that's 200, because there'll be 500 or 600 or 1,000 there, because people are truly standing up. We're all called to look at how flexible are we in our behavior? How open are we to empathize really with the other? How willing are we able to say, like God said to Cain, yes, you're your brother's keeper, period. You can deny it. I'm not asking for you to agree with it. What I'm trying to give you is an idea of reality. You are your brother's keeper. What? You are your brother's brother. You are your sister's brother. You are your brother's sister. And so on that basis, we move ahead. This is why building relationships, real relationships with people who are not you or you think are not you. And also, by the way, I come and understand who you are. Go ahead.
Virginia? Do you have,
Yeah, thank you for that, William. I was going to say, when Cain asked, am I my brother's keeper? God never really answered him. The rest of the Bible is the answer. So, but from Maryland, to stand up, I've been fighting for social justice and civil rights since the 60s. You gotta make yourself vulnerable. And unfortunately, it's usually the people of color that have to be vulnerable. But standing up and being vulnerable will take others out of their comfort zone. And we need to take people out of their comfort zone. You can't sit up in a church or any place else, bring your hands and say, oh, isn't this terrible? No, you got to stand up, and you've got to stand in solidarity with the people who are being oppressed and marginalized. And whether you got to lay your life down you got to put your life on the line, that's part of it.
I want to offer you an invitation, everyone, to engage in what Pope Francis is calling a synod on synodality, and that is respecting each person as filled with God's Spirit, and listen with care and respect to each person, engaging in conversations similar to what we've been having today, on questions that cover several different themes, such as listening, such as authority, which are very germane to today's subject. And what we really are doing is building a faith community that is what is reflective of God's or Allah's will. And I don't know that we should do it as ROCAC's Religious Leaders Caucus in our regularly scheduled third Wednesday of the month, or if we should have a meeting off at a different time. Can be in Zoom because we have this pandemic rearing its ugly head with such constancy. But I wonder if you would let me know if you would like to engage in a conversation where I would then fill in the form with your comments. It's not that we're going to make an enormous difference, but at least we are making a collective statement, and our not our names, but our demographics would be described. We would say what faith we are, if we are of faith or no faith. We would say what county we're from. I see most of us are Monroe County. We would say our gender, and we would say our age group. And we would express if we are a religious leader or not, or whatever. If that's the only description that we would give ourselves, and the number of us. And
Jenny, can I say something?
I just want to finish out this thought. I would like
Okay.
for some people to give input into this process, because it is a chance to make your hopes and dreams for healing wounds, building relationships, creating hope, and changing the church. Now, I can't promise that it's going to be efficacious, but I know that the sharing of people of goodwill is part of the process, and it should be, your goodwill should be reported. And we are encouraged to ask people of all faiths and of no faith and marginalized people and churched and unchurched people to reflect on some of these questions and send them to the Vatican. And I would like to do that with you if any of you are willing. So yes, Marilyn.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I commend you on your efforts. I think they're good. Several years ago, the late Wilma Campbell, Dr. Wilkerson, myself, I think it was a couple of others, engaging in sacred conversations, were put in a fishbowl where we would share certain things. And mostly the people there were white. That was a safe environment. I was able to unload on a lot of stuff that I had went through in my life, and everybody did. That was during sacred conversations.
Well,
But the climate
Yeah.
that we're in now, the climate that we're in now is what happens when you're
Right.
faced with something. When hate comes and knock at your door, that's what's going on in this country right now. When hate knocks at your door and say, I want you out of my neighborhood, or I don't want your grandson walking by my door. Somebody comes up to you and with a rifle in their hand, and you're just trying to find directions, and they got a rifle in their hand, and you got to run for your life, hearing a bullet go by your head. That's the kind of hate we're dealing with now. And you know, Dr. Wilkinson, I appreciate what you said, but I'm telling you, there's a fear also, even in the community of faith. You know, perfect love cast out all faith, all hate. But I'm telling you, there's got to, we can come together as a group, and I can give them. There's got to be something that's got to go back in the community to the people that are not showing up at the table. They're not coming to hear us. That's the mentality that I was talking about. You got to get the fish out of the water before you can even cook it. You got to, before we can start to infiltrate their brain or even say something. And that's why when you ask about in the beginning about why was I here, to stay connected. Because if I stay connected, then I won't get drowned out by the mess that's going on in this world.
But also trust on all of
But
us.
at the end of the day, I still got to walk the way. I still got to go to Wegmans.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I still got to go to the cleaners or whatever. And I don't know what hate gonna come up to me and do what. And at that point, the antidotes, the good things that I might be able to do, I might can't reach in my bag and pull one of those out. And the only thing that I found to do, we had to pull Reverend Stewart out of this mess that we were in that day. The only thing we could do was get him to safety. And the only thing that I knew at that point was to pray.
And you're talking to people who cover you in prayer, not just some of the time, and will stand with you whenever you say you need somebody to stand with you. That's who we are. That's who we're called and gifted to be. And when I invite all of you to participate in the synod that Pope Francis has called by responding to some questions, my contribution to those kinds of conversations is to redesign even how Catholics use part of our worship time. I would like to see what happens in Black churches. I hear, and I've experienced, the prophetic message preached. That is a rare happening in Catholic churches that I've attended. We used to have a church that preached social justice, Catholic social justice teaching, which is pure and simple social justice, anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-killing regularly. I want to see our churches have a prophetic speaker frequently and empower more people to be accredited and authorized to preach so that we will have the prophetic message preached. Unfortunately, statistics say terrible things about some church people who, and the way they vote against social justice. Unbelievable. In fact, they didn't hear the prophetic message, didn't really hear the teachings of the religious leaders. So this is one way, but prayer, Marilyn, as you found, is our strength, and that's across all denominations, all faiths. And standing up. Who has a closing comment? I see that we're at 12:57, and David has his hand up. Yes, David.
I just had two quick things. Number one, Reverend William, you mentioned, I think, like 4 books today. Could you put together a bibliography for us that could be then distributed through the Rock Act Network? They sounded really fine, and I wasn't able to get them down.
So what I did was I sent Denny during our meeting a copy of my notes for today, and those authors and their frameworks are in that, and so you can trace those out. And if you go online, you can get I have sort of a précis of what they had to say, but online you can see their full story. Now, the reason I believe this is important is what we as people of faith need to be speaking to in the community is extremely important. And I believe that it has to do with authoritarianism, with the culture of hatred and how it works, so that people can begin to increase their knowledge of some of these dynamics that are going on with the dismantling of voting, with police violence, with what happened in the Capitol. All these things are part of a same general process. The reason why racism is being resisted, the reason why CRT is being misrepresented, is because it's attempting to say it's not them and us, but this is our story. And authoritarian thinkers don't want there to be more than one story. And what they do is they foster internalized oppression. And in my notes, I'll say a little bit about that. How have we, various groups and ourselves, internalized this idea that we're not worthy? How have we accepted this idea that someone else has said that we're not worthy? Anyway, this framework, I believe, of putting hatred in the context of authoritarianism and then using that to look at what's going on in our society will tell us some things that we need to do. So, for instance, Rock Acts is looking at some of the dynamics of overt prejudice in the suburban schools. And so the question we have for ourselves is, but what are we doing in Rochester? Because clearly you've got to be dealing with Rochester and the suburbs, not just one or the other. The reason is because it's not political. It's not Democratic, should say. It's not Democratic, Republican, and Independents. It's whether you're authoritarian or pro-democracy. And people are called then, I believe, to be in solidarity with whoever is resisting authoritarian kinds of dynamics. Mm-hmm. They may not look attractive on their outset. They may not make you famous, give you the microphone. But by fighting that, we build the popular understanding mm-hmm. of what it means to be in a society with others. In fighting this attempt of genocide across the world over the last century, there's the legal front, which we all need to be supporting. So whenever we have new laws that are coming up that speak against authoritarianism, we need to be there. But the other piece is that even when the laws have not been changed, It's the popular understanding that can have tremendous protective value for the people. And so there is merit, for instance, in doing public speaking about these issues without tying a religious doctrine to it. We're doing it because it's our belief, right? But for the people, they're doing it because they want to survive. So again, thinking about what Sister Reverend Sherry said, practically on the ground, what's happening with authoritarianism and hatred? How is it really playing out? That's where we need to be, like a magnet. That's where we need to be, like a magnet.
Thank you. And I segue into Christian nationalism, the intersection of religion and politics. A discussion will be held on January 24th and 31st at 7 o'clock via Zoom. Registration is needed. It's at St. Luke's Episcopal Church, Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Fairport. And it's featuring the Very Reverend William H. Peterson, PhD, DD, with pastors Abigail Hoffman and Amy Walter Peterson. I'll send you the talking points.
Can you send us the link?
I'm going to send, I can't send you the link. I will send you this flyer
Okay.
and these talking points to prepare for it. We've got homework to do to prepare for it and the way to register. And then they will send you the link. They need to have registration. So that's one thing. The other thing is that Rabbi Peter Stein and Virginia will be speaking on healing hate at our next Religious Leaders Caucus with Rock Acts, 11:30 till 1 on January 19th. And we'll have an Hispanic pastor along with us. And the other thing is you're invited to send a member of your congregation to Rock Acts Poverty Jobs Housing Task Force and work on this housing situation that Kathy McGraw mentioned. I mean, it is ludicrous that we give tax breaks to developers who don't need tax breaks and provide no tax breaks to poor people. And every permission that is granted a developer of residential units, they've got to pledge a certain amount of truly affordable units. Truly affordable. We are in a housing crisis.
Mhm.
And you also already know that 53% of our federal budget goes to the military, much of which is misallocated if some of our enlisted men and women cannot even feed their families adequately. And many of our veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome are homeless. I mean, we have got to figure out that the federal budget is a moral document, and we have got to make it a little different than it is, mighty different. And so with task forces such as that on justice systems, education, poverty, jobs, housing that Rock Acts has, you know, we can really get some members of our congregation on each of those task forces to really do the work and really make it happen. And we show up, you know, when there's a public action. And also there's a petition to sign that I'll mail out very soon, or maybe it'll come from Joanne from Rock Acts about reparations. Consider signing that. Reverend Myra Brown begs us to. Jonathan Naguaracho begs us to. Dr. Kayla Harrison, Reverend William Wilkinson, Dr. Muhammad Shafiq, and I have all signed it and ask you to consider signing it. So we have come to the end of our time together. We could talk for days about this, but please let me know if you are willing to talk with me about scheduling a time when we could fill out these synodal questions of building the church of the future. I really, really, really want your voice heard. I really do. Virginia.
Okay. If anybody is interested for your congregations, I have about 50 copies of a book called Dismantling Racism. It's an excellent, excellent book. It's a beginning, it opens up conversation. So if anybody is interested, they can let me know and I can get them to you.
Virginia, what's the author's name?
Oh God, I don't know what the author's name is. I can send it out to you, Denny.
Okay,
Joseph Barnes? Is that Joseph Barnes?
He used it in Moving Beyond Racism. So it is a very good starting
BARNTZ.
for people to open up a discussion about racism.
great. Good. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, especially Shari, William, and Tabasan. Your words from your lips to God's ears. And Marilyn and everyone who participated. It's really been a valuable experience. And thank you for attending, and we'll see you in a month, if not before. Blessed Christmas and blessed Advent. Bye-bye. Thank you, Duncan, for all of your recording and hosting.